want to get into the Word. We're talking about renewing our passion. Where is that part? Oh, renewing our passion for worship. This is a summer of renewal. We are talking about renewing our passion for worship in this month. Next month, we're going to talk about renewing our passion for prayer. And in August, we're going to be talking about renewing our passion for the Word. So it's key the Wednesday nights because we're going to have focused worship these Wednesday nights. We've been doing that. Next week we're going to have focused prayer on Wednesday nights, and then next month, we're going to have focused prayer on Wednesday nights next month, and then August we're going to have focused teaching because we're going to be talking about renewing our passion for the Word. I really want to encourage you, now that we're talking about this, I really want to encourage you to make every effort to be coming on Wednesdays, especially if you're really interested in learning more of the Word on August. And that month of August, we're going to be talking about something that's going to really help you in understanding how to read the Bible. And it's not dispensations, it's covenants. The Bible was not written in dispensations. The Bible was written in covenants. And I want to make that clear because there's been a lot of theological teaching on dispensations. And the Bible is not written in dispensations. It's written in covenants. And if you understand the covenants, then you'll be able to understand how to read the Bible. That's a lot of people talk about, why did God treat people the way he treated people in the Old Testament, and why did he change when he treated? God never changed. It's the covenants that were established, that God is true to his covenants. And the way he dealt with people he dealt with people according to the covenant that he made with them. Not that he was schizophrenic or that he was, emotionally unstable because he's one thing, a God of anger in the Old Testament, a God of grace in the New Testament. No, he's the same God, the old and the new, and to come is the same Father revealed through the Lord Jesus Christ. So then why is it that, I'm going to answer all those questions. But that's going to happen in August, so don't miss out. But already start coming because we're doing focused nights to renew our passion for the Lord. But let's talk about worship today. Now I'm just going to do an overview really quick, a review of what true worship is. I talked about this last Sunday. Albert, can you close those doors for me, please? Can you close those doors for me, please? So that way, because I get a lot of noise carrying this way. It's good. Fellowship is good. It's pretty cool how people from the first service still hang out. I like that. You don't have to be asking them to hang out. I've been in churches before where you had to be finding creative ways for people to hang out and connect with each other. The problem we have in our church is trying to push everybody out to close the doors and shut everything off. It's a good problem, though. It's a really good problem. Anyways, reviewing worship, Romans 12:1. I talked about this last Sunday. How worship is about how we offer ourselves up as a living sacrifice. The sacrifice in worship is us. The sacrifice is us. We are to offer ourselves up as a living sacrifice. Our worship is a living sacrifice to God in response for what he has done in our lives. He gave his all to us so that we can be saved, so that we can be forgiven, so that we can be rescued, so that we can be transformed. Now, in response to that, not in obligation, but in response, out of gratitude and love for what the love he's shown us through Jesus, now our response is offering ourselves up. The way he offered his life for us, now he wants us to offer our lives to him. What does this mean? I talked about this last Sunday, of course, in review of last Sunday. Worship is a life that is surrendered to God 100%. Is a life. It's more than just singing in church. Singing in church is an expression of our worship, but it's not worship in and of itself. In our modern times, we have been taught that worship is singing, that worship is slow songs. Praise is fast songs and worship is slow songs. We've been taught that's worship. No, that's just the genre of music. That's a genre of a style that helps us to express our worship. But worship in song is just an expression of a life that is already dedicated in worship to God. Our worship is us offering ourselves up to God in every way, offering up our talent, offering up our ability, offering up our mind, offering up everything that we are, offering up our lives, offering up our money. Our money. That's an offering. Why do you think it's called offering? It's expression of worship. It's a part of worship. And so a lot of people think worship is just a song. No, worship is everything that we are given over to God. It's dedicated to Him 100%. It's a life surrendered to God 100%. Second, what is worship? In review of what we talked about last week, it's a life offered to God to be consumed by the fire of God. To be consumed by the fire of God. The fire of His passion, the fire of His love. See, God, the more we offer ourselves up, the more of God's love we experience. The more of God's love we experience. I talked about this in the first service, and I thought it was a cool illustration. I didn't plan on talking about it, but I thought it was cool when it came to me, and I want to repeat it here in the second service. I talked about how we express our love toward each other in the languages of love. How many know the 5 languages of love? Do you remember them? I love the 5 languages of love, especially when you're counseling with couples, and even when you're doing premarital counseling or when you're doing counseling with couples. And when you express the love, you know, I can tell my wife, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you 100 times a day, 100,000 times a day, 100 million times a day. I can tell her every second that I love her, but that's not going to make her feel loved. My wife has 5 languages. I mean, we all have 5 languages, but there's prominent languages that are how we communicate and want to be communicated love. That makes sense? How we want to receive love. This was a big problem when my wife and I first got married. My wife's languages of love, her top language is acts of service. Acts of service. And her least language is physical touch. Mine is the complete opposite. My top language is physical touch, and my least is acts of service. So when we first got married, you know, she expected from me to communicate to her out of acts of service that I loved her. Well, I wanted her to kiss me and hug me because that's what I wanted to do to her. So it was funny because in the beginning, it was like I would go hug and kiss her, and she would just like kind of turn her head. And I was like, what's wrong with you? You don't want me to kiss you, you know? And she would get distracted by something else. I was like, I want you to get into the kiss and the hug. So I was like, there's something not right here. And then on the other hand, she was all like, you didn't throw out the trash. You didn't do this. You didn't do the bed. You didn't do this. I mean, the line of the things that I didn't do. So the big fight was, we started feeling that we really weren't loving each other. Though I would say I love you, to her it didn't mean much because I was not expressing it in a way that she needed to receive it. And vice versa. Now, what does this have to do with God? This is so important because I can say I love God, but my expression of love is what shows it. My expression of love is worship to God. My expression of love is to worship Him. I can say I love God, but it's not until I express it to Him that I'm truly showing what's inside of me. What does that mean? That means according to your level of worship, your passion level of worship, that is what's going to show you how much you really do love God. Does that make sense? How much do you love Him? Now let me use an example. I'm a touchy-feely guy because that's my top, language. So I love to hug and kiss, and there's some people that kind of feel funny about it, but I forget because that's just the way I am. But I don't do it to everybody. I don't do it to people that I don't know. I'm not going to go out in the street, and I'm going to go find somebody to go hug and says, hey, it's like, you weirdo, get off me. Especially if it's a couple, if they're walking by and I'm going to go by and I'm going to hug his wife or girlfriend. It's like, get your hands off. But I'm just a hug. I'm not going to communicate that way. Why? Because I don't know them. Doesn't mean I don't love them per se as the image and likeness of God, but I don't know them. I don't have a personal connection. So I can't just express that language because I don't have a personal connection. This is the way it is with God. Because people don't have, the less you have a personal connection with God, the less you're going to express that love in worship. Does that make sense? The more I come into a personal connection with Him, the more I'm going to express my worship to Him. The more I'm going to express my affection. My worship is my affection to Him. The more I'm going to give Him my all. Because it's in response to who He is in my life. I have a connection with the God that loves me and that's good and is faithful. And that has done so many good things for me. It's at a personal connection. I use the example of Larry that's in the corner. When we first started coming here, I didn't know Larry very well, and I just saw Larry as an old man that's sitting there that's just grumpy. You know, as a grumpy old man, doesn't, just mad of, just using our internet. And, I would just see him there, and he was like, who's that man? Why is he always grumpy and complaining? Who's that? Why is he? So, and then I began to get to know him. Now, when I go out and see Larry, even though he thinks it's a little freaky, but I feel affection for him. I hug him. I feel affection. I express it because why? Because that man that I thought was this grumpy man sitting there, now I really like him. He's a good guy. He really likes us. He's interested in us. And one of these days, I'll get him in here. God's going to get him in here. Amen. Well, we're going to have Holy Spirit. Anyways, but when you have that connection, your expression is different. In the same manner, when I have that connection with God, so personal, my expression is going to change toward Him. Now, I want to talk about this and answer those questions a little bit more. How does that happen? How does my expression change? The more I engage, the more I know, the more I connect. Now, in renewing our passion, there's a great story in John chapter 4. We all remember the Samaritan woman. How many remember that story in the Bible? Where Jesus sat by the well in Sychar, Samaritan town or city. Now, this is an important city because this was their religious city. They had a temple built there, the Samaritans. And the Samaritans didn't get along with the Jews, or Jews didn't get along with the Samaritans, because we know that the Samaritans were not Jews. And Jews could not tolerate Gentiles because they were an abomination according to the law. So they couldn't be around them. So, of course, the Samaritans, though they served the same God, they could not go to the temple in Jerusalem and worship. So they had to build their own temple through the generations and say, this is where we are going to worship. Their ceremonies and their traditions were different than the ones in Jerusalem. There were so many things that were alike, but there were things that were really different. Now, keep that in mind because I'm going to get into the story about their worship. So the Samaritan woman sitting in the well, Jesus sitting in the well, Samaritan woman comes up to get water from the well. And Jesus was tired on the road. Now, he traveled through Samaria, but Jesus is always strategic. Even when he's tired, he's strategic. He was strategic. So he's sitting there. This woman comes up. We know the story. He asks for water, and she's shocked. How does a Jew want to even talk to me and engage with me? And second, ask me for water. And she says, how is it that you being a Jew are doing this? And then he says, well, if you knew who was asking you, then you would be asking me for water. You know the story. I'm going to give you water because I have water of life, that truly satisfies. And then that's when it went to another level. It went into word of knowledge. It got real personal. Because then he said, go ask your husband, go bring him too. And she said, I don't have one. He said, you're right, because you've had 5, and the one you're with is not your husband. This is what was key. She's like, I think you're a prophet. Why? Because prophets minister this way, and they know these things. And the first thing she brings up is religion. Why? Because you're going to judge me as a prophet that I'm a woman, an adulterous woman, according to the law, your law. According to your law, I'm not only supposed to be talking to you, you talking to me, but on top of that, I'm a sinning woman, and I'm going to need to go to your temple and do sacrifices to cover my sin. But then again, I'm a Samaritan woman. I could never go there. I have no hope in front of you. Do you see the implications of what happens when worship is reduced to religiosity? Ceremonial religiosity and tradition. It's not enough. And this is the whole point. I don't want to go too far into this because I want to talk about how to renew our worship. So she's saying, I can't go over there. Our generations here have our own temple. We built our own religion. In other words, she's saying they're cool with me and I'm cool with them. But over there, you guys would stone me to death. I'm good with this side. You're good with that side. I'm going to worship here. You worship there. In other words, before you get any further, you can't really minister to me because I can't fulfill any of your laws. This is deep. I don't want to go too much into that, but there's a lot implied here. But I love the way Jesus comes through. But then we're going to apply it here to us. This is what he talks about in renewing our passion for worship. The first thing we need to understand, we need to see worship as relational and not ceremonial. We need to see worship as relational and not ceremonial. I'm not against ceremonial stuff, but worship is not ceremonial. Worship is relational. Why? Let's look. John 4:19-21. It says, the woman said to him, Sir, I perceive that you're a prophet. Boom, right here. Our fathers worship on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is a place where people ought to worship. Jesus said to her, this is the key of where it becomes relational, not ceremonial. Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain, that's huge, right here, neither on this mountain, nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. What does this mean? All your traditions that justify your sins, all your traditions that make you feel okay are not going to matter. And all the traditions that make you feel condemned and judged are not going to matter. Not here, not there, a place and the ceremonies and the efforts and the laws and the work and the everything you have that is of ceremonial worship, says the Lord, is not going to matter anymore. It's not going to be important. Why? Because let's read it real quick. He says, because Jerusalem, not in here, this mountain, not in Jerusalem, will you worship the Father. Everybody say Father. She didn't know God as Father, and the Jews didn't know God as Father. She's saying, it's not about ceremonial places, ceremonial practices. It's about worshiping the Father. It's a relational connection with God and seeing Him as Father. It's not about reducing Him to practices or reducing Him to ceremonies. It's about God being your Father. It's about seeing Him not as this distant God, as this infinite, immense, holy God, and you as such a sinner, such a worm, so small, so insignificant. No, it's about Him being your Father and you being His son, daughter, Him loving you. See, the moment you make that connection, your worship changes. It's relational. You can express love to a God that is like a father to you than a God that is this distant, immense, ceremonial God. See, the biggest problem that we have is through the years, the traditions that have been established after 300 AD and on, the big temples that were built and the architecture and all of the things, there's nothing bad about architecture and the beauty, but the image of God walking into these big, large churches where you're looking up and it's this God so immense, and you, this little, puny little creation. Yet God is not this God that's so immense and disconnected. He's this Father that is so personal and loving and kind and forgiving and gracious and faithful. He's a Father. Our worship isn't worshiping this God that's distant. Our worship is worshiping this beautiful Father that loves us so much, that is always there. How do I renew my passion for worship? How do you see God? Do you see him as your loving Father that believes in you, that cheers you on, that is with you? Or are you seeing him as this holy, immense, distant God? See, that's the way this woman and the Jews had in mind God. No, it's just this whole mountain, and we built the temple there, and it's this great, holy mountain. Over there, it's this great holy mountain where the temple is built and the ceremonies. And Jesus is saying, it's got nothing to do with that. It's not about the mountain. It's not about the temple. It's not about Jerusalem. It's not about the temple. It's about a loving Father that wants to have a relationship and walk with his child that he loves so much that when you worship him, he wants you to worship him in such a way that is loving as a father, as you love a father. Many of us have to correct our view of our Father because that's what we project upon God. If our Father was abusive, we project that God is abusive. If our Father is distant, we project that God is distant. If our Father is abandoned us, we project that God abandons us. If our Father was emotionally unstable, we project that God was emotionally unstable. Does that make sense? We have to correct our view. So many of us conform. We prefer to just say, okay, I just want to see God as this God that's holy way up in heaven. And me as this sinner that just needs to penitence, God forgive me of my sin. When he's saying to that woman, it's not that I'm not taking under account your sin, but it's the fact that God loves you so much, he wants to walk with you even if you're a sinner. Even if you're doing wrong, he still wants to walk with you. That's a hard concept. So how many of us want to walk with our children when they're disobedient? Go to your room. No. Get away. I don't want to talk to you right now. We avoid. Right now I'm just upset. I'm going to talk to you. Thank God he's not like that. God, help us. It's so hard. But he's not like that. Oh, you upset me, but I'm still here. Oh, it hurts what you're doing, but I'm not leaving you. Can't push me away. You're in my hand. Nobody can take you away. That's worshiping the Father. First thing we have to do to renew our passion for worship, we need to see worship as relational, not ceremonial. Second thing, we need to see worship as spiritual, not traditional. To renew our passion for worship, we got to see it as a relational. It's a relationship. He's my Father and I love you because you love me. Because you're good to me. Second, we need to see worship as spiritual, not traditional, not out of routine. No wonder this poor woman never was changed because it's always about routine. She could never find satisfaction because her religion always was justifying her routine. Justifying her way of worship. Always obligating her to do the same things. And it was not a reality for her. It was not an experience for her. It was not a relationship or a connection. And then we read Jesus saying, verse 22, you worship what you don't know. We worship what we know, according to the law, for salvation is from the Jews. But, that's a big but right there. But, the hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers, what does this mean? True worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. True worshipers are never looking for a tradition. They're always looking for a spiritual experience. It's not real worship until I'm connected with God. It's not real worship unless I am experiencing God. Does that make sense? See, I'm not going to worship just because I'm supposed to, just because it's cultural, or just because this is my practice, or just because this is what they taught me. I'm going to worship not out of tradition. I'm going to worship out of my connection, my spiritual connection with God. That's real. That's true worship. It's my connection. We have to learn to break the routine. We become religious when it's all about routine. We make our own traditions about worship when we make our own routines about worship. Well, I'm not traditional because I'm not Catholic anymore, and I don't do the Catholic thing anymore, or I'm not traditional because I don't do. It doesn't matter if worship has become a routine for you, it's become a traditional thing for you. It's not anymore a spiritual act. It's a traditional act. It's got to become a real spiritual act. It's got to become an experience. It's got to become a reality to you. Where it's not just within these four walls. It's everywhere you go. It's not in the mountain, Jesus said. It's not in the location. You are the location. You are the temple of God. You are the living stones. Wherever you are, that is your place of worship because you are the altar of worship. It's not about location because you are the location. Imagine that. Wherever you go, you are the temple. You take the presence of God, the glory of God with you. 3, we need to see worship not only as spiritual, not traditional. We need to see worship as reciprocal and not unilateral. Reciprocal. What does this mean? I love this part. For the Father, Jesus says, is seeking such people to worship Him. He's seeking such people to worship Him like this. He's the one that's seeking people that are willing to worship Him in this manner, making this personal and amazing connection and relational connection with Him. He reciprocates. It's like us with our children. How many of you want your children to love you back? That attracts you, doesn't it? I mean, you love your kids, but you're going to spend more time with the kid that's showing you love. It's a reality. You have to actually be intentional about spending time with the kid that doesn't show you love. You have to force yourself at times. Doesn't want to. You have to force yourself. He doesn't want to show me love. So, but I gotta be there, unconditional. Oh, but if it's the one that's showing you love, you long to be there. You're attracted to that. You want to spend time. Why? Because it's that. There's so much power in a love that's reciprocated. That's the way with God the Father. There's so much power in a love that's reciprocated. When you come to church to show and express your love to Him, why do you think the presence of God manifests tangibly in a gathering where people are expressing their love toward Him? He's looking for that gathering. That's why many people, it's sad to say, but many places of worship have lost the tangible presence of God because there's no more true expression of love in that place. It's tradition, it's routine, it's dry. I'll be honest with you, I would prefer to have, like in this second service, this small group, than the place filled with people that feel no love toward God. I would prefer to have 10 to 15 people that would have a passion and a hunger and a yearning to love God because He has loved them so much and they express it with all their hearts. That's where I would prefer to be because I know for sure that the tangible presence will manifest there because God the Father is attracted to His children that show Him love. It's a magnet. I want to be a magnet to God. So many times we're asking, how do I renew my passion for God? How much do you love him? How do I renew my passion for worship? How much do you show that you love him? Because the more that you show it, the more you're going to attract his tangible presence. We need to see worship as spiritual, not traditional. We need to see worship as reciprocal and not unilateral. And the last point, we need to see worship as a requirement and not an option. Not an obligation, but as a requirement. Why? Then Jesus sums it up saying, God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. God is spirit, so it's required that you worship him this way, with this personal connection, this father-son connection, father-child connection. It's a require. You can't say worship is not your thing. Well, it's just about reading and studying the word, Pastor. That's what I think. It's not a bad thing, but you're required to worship. That's the only way you're going to connect. Truly, truly connect with the Father is through worship. How do you truly connect with God? Well, I mean, I just read my word. Good, I'm glad you read your word. I'm against that. But do you worship? And I'm not just talking about singing a song. I'm talking about truly worshiping, expressing your love. There's some people who say, well, I can't sing worth a hoot. But how are you saying? What are you telling them? Are you telling them I love you? Are you telling them, oh, I don't know about those, words about, magnify, glorify, exalt. Well, can't you just tell them, you're so awesome? You're the bomb. You're the coolest. I don't care. He doesn't care. He's not this holy God so far away that you need to have King James Version words to worship him. You got to learn the lingo. He just wants to hear the expression of your heart, your love toward him. You've been so good to me. I had a friend, when we first came, him and I first came to Jesus, I had a friend that he was real rough in his language. And but yet he loved God so much when we first came to Christ. God rescued him big time from drugs, just like me. And, we came out of a bad background. And, God just rescued him. But I remember he was like a week old in the Lord or something like that, 2-3 weeks old. And it was so funny. He was so excited. We were in one of those services where God's presence was so amazing. And God was giving him some breakthroughs. And it was one of those amazing times. And it was funny because we got together. And when we got together, we were talking about the Lord. And he was like, gosh, man, God is so effing awesome. And I was laughing. He didn't even notice he said that. But I understood it. I wasn't going to say, oh, you just sinned. You said a bad word. And Christians don't say words like that. It was all he knew, and it's how he expressed it. God was effing awesome. Do you think God got offended? You think God got hurt by that? Oh my God, you just said a bad word. I don't like you anymore. No. That's his son. That's his background, came out of that. All he knew is expressing his love this way. Now, religious people tend to get hung up on how we say things and how we do things and how we gotta break that. If it's coming from spirit and in truth means it's just coming from your heart. It's a true expression of worship. And then we all think, now that we're talking about this in the genres too, of worship genre, it's like we think worship has to be a genre of slow songs And I'm not against that. I love worship. I love worship. I passionately love worship. But you know what? Some folks that are outside of our boxes of thinking or ways of thinking, their worship is like heavy metal rock. I had a friend, I don't know, we're talking about friends. I had a friend one time that's like, oh, dude, I love this. He was a, big rock, rock and roll dude. I mean, we're rock dude, big time rock dude. And he had long hair, and, he liked all the rock songs and everything. But it was interesting because it was like this. Of course, he came to Christ. He stayed with the heavy metal rock Christian, and Striper and those dudes. And I don't remember who, back in the 80s and 90s, early 90s or 80s. But I remember that one time he was telling me, oh, dude, I felt the presence of God in that song. And I was like, which song? This one, man. I was in his car, and he put it on. It was like this heavy metal. You got to hear the words. I don't even understand them. But he was like, this is glorious. This is awesome. Do you think God was offended? Do you think God was angry? Oh, do you think he was an immature Christian that soon he would grow up to like worship songs like us? I haven't had contact with him in so long, but I wouldn't doubt that he'd still like heavy metal rock. And even if he did, praise God for that. That's the way he feels the presence of God. It's his expression. Worship. He's a true worshiper. A true worshiper doesn't have to like Hillsong and Bethel music. A true worshiper is just somebody that really loves God and expresses it with their awe. That's who God is looking for. And it's a requirement. Why is it a requirement and not an option? Because that's the way we connect with them and spiritually connect with them. It's a requirement. How is it a requirement? Let me just tell you this, and I'll sum it up with this. If you're truly going to make a connection with your children, don't you think love is a requirement? What other ways can you connect with your children if it's not through love? Love is a requirement. In my marriage, if there's no love, why are we even together? It's sad, but now we're talking about this. There's many marriages that are just together out of obligation, not out of love. There's many people that are with God out of obligation, not out of love. I just don't want to go to hell. I just don't want to burn. That's not worship. I don't come to church because I'm afraid. I don't come to church because I have to. I come to church because I get to. I worship him not because I have to. I worship him because I get to. And if it's the only way to truly connect with God, what a way to connect with God. Worship is amazing. Worship is the best. We've got to start looking at it that way. Yes, singing, it's expressing it through song, but that's not the full gist of worship. It's how am I really expressing my love toward God for who he is in my life. Go ahead and stand with me, please. Can we come up front?